Hello again, it's Dr. Petri. Welcome back to our third podcast about the Holocaust. Today we're going to talk about the Enabling Act, which happened after the fire in the Reichstag. And this fire made Germany declare a national emergency. And after that national emergency, they suspended all constitutional guarantees. They suspended freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, right to be free from search or seizure without probable cause, and due process under the law. And these measures, this kind of hysteria that the people were so frightened of, paved the way for the Enabling Act, which suspended the normal constitutional protections that people had in Germany. And so this presidential decree that was dated February 28, 1933, gave Hitler, as chancellor, emergency powers. And on that same day, every single Communist Party member of the Reichstag was arrested, and several of them were beaten. And then later, in early March, the Nazis win 288 of the 647 seats in the Reichstag, and they start building up their power again. On March 5th, Germany's states were stripped of their power, and the one-party national government sort of takes control and begins their persecution of the Jews. So it's important to realize that the Enabling Act, Germany was a democracy. And until those rights were suspended by the government, nobody thought that could happen to them. Nobody thought, oh, we'll lose our freedom of the speech. Oh, we'll lose our right to privacy. That's why we still make a big deal of it when we think the government infringes on our right to privacy. Because once they take your right to privacy and your right to free speech, well, then what else can the government do? So, and unfortunately, in Hitler's case, as you see from the slide, he's whipped the public into a frenzy. This is called the Nuremberg Rally, and it took place in 1935. And these rallies are huge demonstrations, and they call for people like Hitler they celebrate Hitler and they celebrate the Nazi Party, and they promote Nazi values, which are the purity of Aryan blood. And these mass demonstrations had the effect of creating these intense emotional experiences for the participants, which deepens support that Hitler gets from his citizens and deepens the Germans' commitment to his party and his goals. And over these next few slides, we're going to talk about the increased persecution of the Jews that took place before 1935, and then we'll discuss the Nuremberg Laws, which were voted in after the rally. So, the first step was a national boycott, and that took place on April 1st, 1933. And the goals were to intensify anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish sentiment, to motivate Jewish businessmen to sell their businesses to non-Jews and get out. They were meant to appease the radical Nazis who wanted more action against the Jews. So these uniformed Nazis blocked Jewish-owned stores and wouldn't let customers go in. And also Jewish doctors, lawyers, and judges were also targeted during the boycott on this day. And you can see from the sign actually reads, "Germans, defend yourselves, don't buy from Jews." And in history, we don't really think like this could happen to us, but this has happened in America, this has happened to almost every racial group that came to America. There were signs saying Irish need not apply. The Italians were discriminated against. The Germans were discriminated against. The blacks have been discriminated against, and the Latinos have been discriminated against. America seems to follow these nationalist patterns where, we let a group of people in, and then they want to close the door and say, no more immigrations, we don't like these people anymore. So, but back to Germany, many Germans disregarded the boycott. They stayed home that day, and then after the boycott, they continued to shop at the stores that were owned by the Jews. But for a lot of Jewish shopkeepers, the boycott was really devastating. Many did sell their businesses to non-Jews, and then they left the country. And it's important to remember that the people who left the country were by and large the people that had the most money. If you didn't have any money saved up, it was really hard to flee the country and start over somewhere else. So, The Occupational Exclusion Act was called a law for the restoration of the professional civil service. It was passed April 7th, 1933, and Jews were required to resign from all of their government jobs. And so German Jews that had fought on the front lines in World War I, or if their father or son were killed in action, they were exempted from this law. And then in September of 1933, the Jews were removed from the cultural and media organizations in Germany. So the Nazis are moving swiftly to deny Jews their livelihoods and their dignity. A larger objective was to motivate the German Jews to get out, to emigrate, to leave the country. And about half of Germany's Jewish population does that. They leave during the Nazi years before it gets really bad. But the German government requires them to leave their homes, their property, and their savings behind. And how hard is it to go and start over somewhere else in a new country when you don't have any money? So, the next phase were the Nuremberg Laws, and these laws were designed to protect the Aryan race. And in order to implement these anti-Semitic, these anti-Jewish policies, the Nazis had to clarify, they had to legally define who the Jews were. So it was stated that the Nazis considered the Jews a race, not a religion. Most people today say Jews are religious people, or people who choose to believe in the Jewish faith. It's not necessarily a group of people, like a race of people. But Germans, back in the 1930s, even though they had a mixture of Jewish and Gentile ancestors, the Nuremberg Laws clarified how they would categorize these different individuals. The Nuremberg Laws also stripped Jews of German citizenship, including the right to vote or hold public office, and these laws also criminalized interracial relationships and marriages. And this was if you were a Jew married to a non-Jew. And so they had all sorts of different designations for if you had two full Jewish grandparents, or if you only had one Jewish grandparent, if you were married to a Jewish person. So they created all these classifications, and you were entitled to less benefits, less rights under German law if you were married to a Jew. So, also, the people who were considered Jewish by the Nazis were the children who were born by which at least one parent was Jewish, and if the marriage occurred after September 15th, 1935. So children who were born out of wedlock after July 31st, 1936, who had at least one Jewish parent, they were considered Jews. Individuals who were not Jewish but mixed were called Mischling of the first degree, and if you came from two Jewish grandparents, if you did not adhere to the Jewish religion, if you were not married to a Jew and you don't marry a Jew, you're called a Mischling. And individuals descended from one Jewish grandparent, a Mischling of the second degree, were also classified. So these laws, these classifications, they address the identity of children who are going to be born after the laws go into effect. And this Mischling actually means mixed race. It could protect people from persecution. In the Nazi world, it was better to be a Mischling of the second degree and therefore less Jewish than someone who was a Mischling of the first degree. But those people, those mixed people, the Mischling people still had rights. They weren't as bad as someone who was a pure Jew, with both parents being Jewish. So, the next thing that happens is the 1936 Olympics, and this is held in Berlin. And it's in Germany, so Hitler is proud and prominent, and he's in the stands, and this whole symbol of Aryan dominance, this world symbol of Aryan dominance, kind of gets a black eye, pardon the pun, by Jesse Owens, an African-American runner from the United States. He wins 4 gold medals. So it kind of puts a damper on the whole white people, or Aryans, being the master race when a black man comes in and wins 4 gold medals from them. So the games did go on. Hitler hoped the games would be a showcase for the achievements of the Third Reich, but when Jesse Owens wins all these medals, it kind of challenges racial superiority theory that the Aryans had. And the rest of the world knows this, but Hitler is able to hide a lot of this from the German people because he controls the movies and the media. And of course, there's no TV in 1936. People see a newsreel. And if you were German, you probably didn't see Jesse Owens win those gold medals. But if you were in the United States, you certainly did. And there goes my lights. Thank you, Kennedy High School, for the motion detectors in every room. All right, the next slide talks about Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass. And you can see this is a Jewish-owned store in the picture here, and it's been damaged by a bomb. This is where people it starts off a Jewish teenager named Herschel assassinates a German embassy officer. So this happens in Paris. And in Germany, when they hear about it, they use this incident, they use this event as a pretext for nationwide violence against the Jews. So they attack homes, they attack businesses, they attack the synagogues, the temples, and they're attacked and destroyed, and tens of thousands of Jews are arrested and put into the concentration camps. The Jewish community was charged a fine of 1 billion marks to pay for the damage. And Kristallnacht was the first coordinated, organized instance of violent action against the Jews in Germany. It's immediately followed by the Aryanization, or the confiscation, of Jewish property and businesses. So they come in, they wreck your house, and then they take all your property. And if you're lucky enough to have survived it, you go into the concentration camps, and now you're working. So this kind of leads us to daily life for the Jews in Nazi Germany, and you know, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and a lot of people kind of question, well, why didn't the Jews rise up? Why didn't the Jews rebel? And there are certainly instances of Jewish rebellions, but what happens is the Nazis start off gradually, and they tell the Jews, don't worry, this is just temporary, everything's going to go back to normal, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and by the time it's really so bad it's intolerable, the Jews are almost powerless to help themselves. So the first law that happens is Jews are banned from public libraries, from public transportations, from going to the movie theaters, from using parks, from using recreation centers. Then there are daily curfews where if you're Jewish you can't be out at certain hours. And the shopping is limited. If you're Jewish, you're only allowed to shop 1 hour a day. Well, that's very inconvenient, right? Jewish people were also prohibited from owning cars and from typewriters, and ironically from smoking, which may have made them healthier to go into the concentration camps. But smoking was a privilege, it was a sign of being upper class, it was a sign of dignity. And remember, one of the crucial things when you're trying to oppress people is you need to take away their dignity. You need to make them feel humiliated and feel like they're not real people. So by part of that was, they're not allowed to smoke, they're not allowed any of these status symbols. The Jews, of course, were required to wear the yellow Star of David on their outer clothing. They were prohibited from buying flowers, from purchasing eggs, vegetables, meat, and white bread, all of the good, healthy foods. And Jewish pet owners had to bring in their animals, which would be put to sleep. Not really put to sleep, probably shot or stomped on, but this just totally, as a dog owner, tugs at my heart. I could almost deal with anything, but putting my pet to sleep, oh, that's just heartbreaking. So this is a little bit about how life starts getting worse and worse for the Jews. And what's going to happen next is you're going to have other countries that are saying, oh, no, you can't treat those poor people like that. And you're going to have people open up their countries to refugees. The Jews are leaving. Like we know 50% of the Jews left while Germany was in charge, while the Nazis were in charge. The other 50% stayed behind. But the 50% who left, that's who we'll talk about next. How did they get out of Germany? How did they survive? So good luck with your notes. Keep reviewing these videos for your quiz, and have a great evening.